Anime. You've probably heard of it before. You've probably even got a friend who likes it a little too much. It's a growing medium, popularised in the West by shows like Naruto, Dragon Ball, One Piece, and more recently Attack on Titan and Demon Slayer. Inoue Takahiko, the creator of Slam Dunk and Vagabond, said that manga only exists to be captivating. Manga and anime then have the ability to be transnational because this captivating nature allows it to be enjoyed by everyone, not just Japan. So then, how exactly has anime become so prominent in the West? This video will explain some of the history and some of the reasons as to why so many people around the world love anime. Just a quick note that this video is adapted from an essay that I wrote for my master's course in Japanese studies last year, so everything is properly sourced. If anyone wants any references for anything, then let me know in the comments. Close ties between America and Japan in the post-war occupation era between 1945 and 1952 resulted in a steady stream of Japanese culture and products making its way over to the US, starting the process of normalization of the otherwise foreign culture at this time. In the 1960s, early Japanese anime content was broadcast on American networks to fill airtime as new TV channels and theatres were created. A few subtitled anime series were broadcast on ultra-high frequency channels in American cities with large Japanese-speaking populations, and were also watched by broader audiences. In addition, some dubbed and heavily edited, but also recognisably Japanese shows were broadcast on public and local channels, while the Cartoon and Fantasy Organisation also aggressively promoted anime at the same time. This set a precedent to other countries in the West, notably in Europe, that Japan was a reliable source of cheap entertainment to fill their public broadcasts. Italy was the first to adopt such methods, and in 1975 and 1976 the Italian television broadcasting system was changed to favour free, private channels which were supported by commercials. This meant that the broadcasters had to fill several hours of daily airtime. Likewise, in the 1980s, France started a similar venture and started to broadcast anime as well. Goldorak, UFO robot Grendizer, which also happened to be one of the first anime aired in Italy as well, may have been the most watched anime of all time while being aired in France, with a television watch rating of 100% in its primetime slot. However, according to interviews, most people who watched the show were completely unaware of the anime's Japanese origins. These Japanese animated series were picked up specifically because of their competitive prices. Japanese animation and comics had become industrialized because of their domestic popularity, resulting in them being cheaper to produce and distribute. Grendizer was produced for less than $3,000 a minute, compared to the $4,000 to $5,000 of Western cartoons like Tintin. Under the demand of the international market, production companies started to sell to and produce with European studios, especially creating works based on classic novels, and this was the first step to normalising the idea of showing foreign cartoons to children in the West. It was necessary, according to the Western distributors, for these early Xbox to be heavily edited and denationalised before being broadcast on Western air because of the cultural odour of Japanese products. As Iwabuchi Koichi explains, popular cultures have an odour to them, either a positive scent or a negative stink. This can be seen clearly by products that denote which country they were created in. Products that were made in Western countries such as the UK, Germany or the US are usually perceived to be of higher quality because of the higher standards of engineering and welfare, as well as a historic continuity in their production. Whereas products that were made in second and third world countries like China or Bangladesh are usually thought of as being lower quality because they do not have quality regulations and because of the cheapness of the objects. Japanese culture and products were often associated with having a stink because of Japan's role in the Second World War as an aggressor. Therefore, the only way that a Japanese product could be successful internationally is by becoming odourless by getting rid of the Japanese aspects of it. Thus, the technological and cultural exports of Japan tend to be odourless, which is unlike the cultural exports of other countries such as French wines or Italian fashion. Between the 1950s and 1990s, it was hard for Japan to create a cultural fragrance, which is a cultural export that would be enhanced by the fact that it is Japanese. However, the high quality of its technological and cultural products in recent years are managing to create this fragrance. Well-known Japanese exports like Walkman, Kawasaki and Sony do not show their inherent odour because they are technological products, though it would be hard to show this short of painting a Japanese flag on the product. Even between the 1990s and 2000s, when Japanese culture had become more normalised in the West, the odour was still pervasive. Sailor Moon was broadcast in America between 1995 and 1996. Though it is known now as a very influential anime, especially for young girls, it was a commercial failure because it was too different, too Japanese, and not American enough. The settings, themes and characters were inherently Japanese, and it was hard to mask even with dubbing over the original audio. In contrast, at the same time, Power Rangers, originally a Japanese invention where people trained in martial arts used their powers to fight kaiju, garnered great success in the West. The distributors recognised the problem with its odour, and parts of the show were reshot with American actors and scenery, showing that the West was still not fully prepared for wholly Japanese shows even into the 2000s. Therefore, the most important aspect of the globalization of cultural products, at least in order for Japan to negate its odour, is the localization and in turn denationalization of exports to make them more popular overseas. Localization is the adaptation of pop culture to the cultural, social and political realities of the regions and nations to which they are being sold. Localization can include things like providing subtitles, dubbing over the Japanese voices, or even censoring or heavily editing parts of the product. In the later part of the 2000s, huge Western companies that had recognized the significance of Japanese works, like DreamWorks, Fox, Sony and Paramount, poured huge sums of money into localizing and denationalizing anime and manga adaptations that they adapted into Western media. One of the most notable examples would have been Transformers, which, while jointly Japanese and American in origin, was created to look entirely American with the setting being in America. So, in order to become popular overseas, anime had to be denationalised, and it was the successful denationalisation of anime which has in part led to the success of anime worldwide. With regard to anime and manga, there is already a sense of perceived denationalisation even in its creation. Japanese series have notable characteristics that initially were said to make them more approachable by a foreign audience, but as time went on and Japan's odour turned to a fragrance, made them recognisably Japanese and key parts of their notoriety. Such features include big colourful eyes, pale white skin and bright colourful hair, none of which are features associated with Japanese people. These features present in anime and manga characters are thought to be, from a Euro-American viewpoint, representative of Japanese westernization and its ability to appeal to the West, or its want to seem like the West. However, while there may be some aspect of want, other factors for these characteristics apply, such as the use of eyes as an expressive function, thus making larger eyes easier to work with and convey certain emotions, which is influenced by Western animation like Disney. There is certainly the thought of cultural odour when discussing the reasons for certain traits used in Japanese series. However, it should also be made aware that this was the style long before manga and anime were even thought about being presented internationally. There was no need to appeal to the West at this time or accommodate them into their works because Japan still saw itself as culturally insignificant. In fact, a manga or anime character, even though they do not look Japanese with their features, represent a common Japanese person regardless, because of the context, location, language and authorial intent, allowing a Japanese person to identify with them. And many main characters in Japanese series are intentionally left blank and bland so the audience can apply themselves to the character. This is simply how it has been since Osamu Tezuka codified it in the post-war period. Likewise, however, the nature of these characters also allows people in the West to project themselves and identify with these characters as well. While the style of manga and anime has mostly remained constant over the years and series are first and foremost created for the domestic market, while the style of manga and anime has mostly remained constant over the years and series are first and foremost created for the domestic market, the style has inadvertently helped to spread anime and manga internationally. The distribution and localization of anime and manga between the 1970s and the present have been key in spreading the mediums internationally. However, first and foremost, the works themselves have to be enticing in order for the watchers and readers to pick them up. Now, it could be said that overseas distributors would only choose to distribute those works which are already popular in Japan, or those which they know will be successful in their own respective domestic markets. A bit easier to do now, but between the 1970s to the 2000s, it was much harder to ascertain which shows and comics would be popular because it was the first time dealing with such products. And, even if children liked the shows, its themes may not have been appropriate. This was the problem for Italy in the 1970s, as some of the shows selected glorified the imagery of war and political ideologies which was not allowed in post-war Italy. In addition, what is popular in Japan may not also be popular in the West because of the different values that each culture has, though it is ultimately down to individual taste. In general, Japanese manga and anime are popular internationally because they are of high quality. Cartoons and comics in the West are primarily for children or are focused on superheroes, but these Japanese works provide a high quality alternative that fill the niche for other material. For alternatives in the West, consumers have to wait for full books to be written, full movies to be created, or full television series to be shot, all of which can take months or years. But anime and manga provide detailed worlds and characters that are released weekly or monthly in a format that is easy to consume. In turn, with the fast production in Japan, distributors in the West also sold them as quickly as they could, and these fast-releasing Japanese comics, with stories that were just as rich, if not richer, than their American counterparts, made them more appealing to become invested in. While the long form of manga, with a linear story spanning multiple issues and volumes, also made them more enticing to read, as well as heavily influencing Western artists to follow suit. Japanese anime and manga are original, innovative, stylish, and unique. There is an anime or manga for every topic and every person. There are kodomo for children, shonen for boys, shoujo for girls, josei for women, and seinen for men. With these classifications, they are split further into different genres like horror, fantasy, sci-fi, magical girl, mecha, and slice of life, to name just a few. Within each of these different genres, anime and manga, in contrast to Western cartoons and comics, are known for not shying away from the awkward and uncomfortable in their portrayals. They are such a big step away from the happily ever after Hollywood and Western productions. Japanese productions do not always have a happy ending, making them more realistic and more appealing to many viewers. Anime and manga embrace life in all its dimensions, even if it can be unsettling. There is a strong sense of idealism and innocence in these works by the authors, and a close portrayal of ordinary life, including the weakness of characters. The overall portrayal of the stories, showing characters overcoming the odds, defeating villains through their own power, and learning more about themselves through character development as the story goes on, is something that can be enjoyed internationally. American comic books, on the other hand, focus on the superhero, essentially the unattainable, such as Superman, whose powers are completely other, or heroes like the Hulk, whose powers are obtained by radiation, which is completely juxtaposed to the portrayal of radiation in Japan that creates monsters. While there are also comics based on forms of more attainable or human powers, like Batman and Iron Man's powers being reliant on wealth, and Spider-Man's stories being based around a local setting, it is very clear that these comics and the powers in them are just not achievable. Manga and anime do also have these aspects to a large extent, as the main character has an inherent level of power that puts them above others in the story. But manga and anime also push the message of achieving power for oneself and by oneself. Even though the characters are automatically powerful, larger threats force them to grow as people and grow in strength, which often can only be done through training and honing their skills. Three of the most popular manga and anime, Naruto, Dragon Ball and One Piece, all portray these aspects in their stories. The viewers see them in their weaker states at the start of the series, which they can project themselves onto, especially as many also have relatable problems. But as the series goes on, the viewer watches them train in order to get stronger. These shows have very relatable and important messages, while also being a fun medium to interact with. They also pay a large amount of attention to feelings, as emotions are treated in a much richer way. This becomes especially prevalent in manga for children and adolescents. Though it may be a work for children, the authors do not treat them like a child when expressing the emotions and deal heavily with complex events, but they do so in a way understandable to a child. Western comics do also have a wide breadth of emotional focus, it is just limited by their narratives. Manga focuses on the commonality of its narrative, making it more empathetic and relatable, whereas Western comics focus on the unattainable, making the audience sympathise but not empathise. In a survey that MARKETABILITY conducted in Italy in 2006 on the internet, 43.4% of 328 respondents believed that manga put elements of reality in a fantasy context, which also, according to Pelleteri, is one of the most attractive features of manga. By doing this, it shows that problems that a child might face as they grow up are also problems that not only people in another country like Japan also face, but also problems that people in different worlds entirely face. This validates the reader's feelings, helping them to understand while also making it enjoyable. The wide variety of themes and genres, as well as the messages they portray while also being unique, high quality, consistent and fun, certainly allow for anime and manga to be enjoyed both domestically and internationally. Another major aspect for the popularity of anime overseas is simply because it's made to be marketable. The author may not initially have envisioned their work as marketable when they first were creating it, but the producers and the distributors base their decisions on the marketability of the product. For example, current popular genres are taken into consideration on whether or not a new series will be able to compete or join in with the success. You can look at the absurd amount of isekai anime airing in recent years thanks to the success of shows like Sword Art Online. The majority of manga that become anime are those aimed at children and adolescents because the simplistic and iconic designs of characters make them more appealing to children and more reproducible for the market. An example of this is the idea of media mix in the industry, in which a producer will have multiple works across many different genres and platforms created, like video games and manga, all linked to one world. In order for fans to find out all the information that they can and to support the work and the creators, they must engage with and buy multiple types of mediums. An example of this would be the Fate series, as well as any medium that also has gacha. Because anime was typically sold very competitively to television broadcasters in Japan and in the West, anime studios had to create other ways to earn more profit. In the 1980s and 90s, anime production expanded into worlds of production, where characters are adapted into commercials, video games, live-action films, and merchandising. In a world where people become obsessed with branding like clothes, cars, and media, fans who are dedicated to their favourite anime or manga series bring in a new source of income to the companies, and the branding, and in some cases the product themselves, make them coveted items for fans and collectors. For example, Evangelion's merchandise and publishing tie-ins earned 10 times more than its box office returns around its release. In some cases, the collectible aspect of a product makes it more valuable than the product itself or the thing it is associated with, making it more marketable. The most prominent example of media mix and worlds may be that of Pokemon, which could be considered as the turning point for commercial strategies related to multimedia attitude. Pokemon has video games, anime, manga, commercial tie-ins, movies, live-action films, clothing, toys, apps, and merchandising. The popularity of the cute and cool Pokemon in the games and anime have made it into a marketable colossus on the world stage. Children and adults get to see and collect their favourite Pokemon, and the products are designed to be buyable, while the franchise itself is almost entirely denationalised, especially to children, who are the main demographic. Therefore, it is clear as to why cultural exports like Pokemon, as well as a multitude of different anime, manga, and video games from Japan are popular around the world. It is because they are designed to be so.